back on Thursday night AMP, and we have a very special guest joining us again this week. And this time it's Michael Kingston, who is from the Headlocked comic book, and it's going to be starting a new Kickstarter campaign. So, Mike, thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thanks very much for having me. Really appreciate it.
It's our pleasure. You've been doing a lot of interviews lately, and this is a big buzz right now in the wrestling world. But let me just start by saying I know you were just at the New York Comic Con, and before we talk about anything else, I want to know about that experience. What was it like? What did you see? What did you do? Tell us all about it.
New York Comic Con was great. It's my favorite show of the year. Because it's a big show, but it's also a show that people spend money at. You know, as a vendor, it's obviously very important. San Diego Comic Con is a giant Comic Con that everybody knows about, but the people there have been kind of conditioned by the big movie studios that they can get so much for free that they don't necessarily need to have money when they come to that show. For us, it was crazy. We had a booth, and Jerry Lawler and Hurricane were there. Jerry does the covers to the book, and Hurricane had a short story in our latest book, so they were helping us promote it. Jerry was selling his artwork, they were doing the whole 8x10 deal. But, I really didn't get to see much from the show because we were so busy the entire time. It was tough. I mean, I came in early a couple days and wandered around before doors opened up, but it's not quite the same, when all the displays are shut down and tarped off and whatnot. So, it was pretty much a straight up business trip.
Yeah, it's cursive when you vend at a Comic Con or a convention of any kind. I've talked to people at San Diego Comic Con who have the same problem. They're like, well, there's all these cool panels going on. There's all these booths selling all this merchandise, and I can't go because I'm stuck at my table.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I don't know, a lot of people find time to get away, but I'm just paranoid about it just because I feel like nobody can sell my book as good as I can. So I feel like any time away from my table is sort of a lost opportunity. So usually the only thing that gets me away from my table is, if I have a very important meeting or, when nature calls.
Yeah, when you have to go because you have to go. That can't be helped. But you said that Jerry Lawler and Hurricane Helms were both there. Now, obviously, like you said, Lawler does illustrations, and Helms is a big comic book fan. After all, he used to play a larger-than-life comic book superhero on Raw every week, so that had to be a real treat getting to share the table with them and get to hear their stories as they chatted it up with the fans.
It's always a lot of fun. I mean, I've done a lot of shows with Jerry, and I've done a couple of shows with Shane now, and, they're a lot of fun, and I like both of them, and I like both of their girlfriends, fiancés, and, we have just as much fun at the table as we do after the show, going out to dinner and, swapping stories and whatever. So, it's a really good time.
Does Lawler ever tell you any of his Andy Kaufman stories from the old Memphis days?
He does a little bit, but one of the reasons why I think I get along so well with all these guys is that we don't talk too much about wrestling. We talk more about comics and we talk more about art. I think it's hard sometimes. I think when it's your job and you live that 24/7 and
right, you
everybody
don't want to talk about it all the time with everybody. You need a break once in a while.
So I try not to fanboy it up too much. It's not easy sometimes. But we end up talking a lot more about comics and art and such and just personal stuff rather than getting into scoops and whatnot.
Of course, yeah. And I'm sure there's things, even if Lawler wanted to talk about him, he can't because he's still on Raw every week as a commentator, so there's things that he could say, but he can't.
Yeah, obviously we're friends now. He trusts me. We can talk. There's just, and he knows I'm not gonna,
you're not gonna spill it to the dirt sheets. You're not putting any spoilers on this show.
Because, not for nothing. Obviously Jerry's the hand and I'm not biting the hand, so.
Right, of course. But yeah, it's good that you got that relationship where you can trust each other and still have fun. But you mentioned, of course, you'd rather talk about comics with them when you get a chance to shoot the bull. And I want to talk comics with you for a minute. I want to know what led you to your passion for comics, because I always get to ask people about their passion for wrestling. But now that I've got an author on the line, I want to know, how did you get into comics?
I've been a wrestling fan and a comic book fan since I was about 8 years old. I always liked the stories, the superhero stuff, the larger than life characters. It just, when you're younger, it appeals to you. And then I got out of comics when I was in college, which I think a lot of people do, because it's hard to collect when you're sort of in that environment. And
yeah, you lose the cool. You're not looked at as the cool kid who has the latest comic book anymore. Now you're looked at as the dork who has comics.
well, it's not even that. It's just logistically it's difficult to get to a comic book store every week when you're at a on a campus and you don't have a car and. I was a biochemistry major, so I had labs all the time in classes.
Yeah, you didn't have the time to devote to 4 or 5 series to follow every single week.
So then when I got out of college, I got back into it. I started buying books again and, refilling the holes in my collection. And, I don't know how familiar you are with comics, but I read X-Men growing up. And, when I canceled and when I stopped reading, when I started putting my collection back together, I realized the first book that I needed to buy to fill the hole, the last book that I stopped at was the first appearance of Sabretooth, which
wow.
At the time was a very big selling book. So
yeah, that's a very collectible issue now. It's pretty in demand.
Yeah, so that was sort of unfortunate, but and then I guess I picked back up into comics, and then I read a book called Concrete, Think Like a Mountain, which somebody had recommended to me, and it was about this sort of character who was a big man encased in a rock body. He's sort of like the ultimate observer because he doesn't have all these sensory experiences. So he's sort of, just observing things, and he's sort of a reporter, and he gets involved with the Earth First, like sort of radical environmentalist movement. And it was just smart, and it was educational, but it was entertaining, and it really made you think. And that totally changed my mind about what comics could be. I mean, I think people think that comics are just a superhero thing, but, when you think of comic book movies, you think of, Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, Green Lantern. But like History of Violence was a comic book before it was a movie, and Ghost World and Road to Perdition. Obviously Walking Dead is more famous now.
Sin City, that was comic first. So.
What's that?
Sin City as well.
Right. And so that sort of totally changed my opinion about what comics could be. And then I started reading other forms of comics that weren't superhero books, and that's what led me to want to do Headlocked, because as a wrestling fan, I would buy every wrestling comic that came out, and I would always be disappointed. I'd be like, man, this book sucks. It was wrestlers doing anything but wrestling, Undertaker fighting demons or Kevin Nash's Mad Max, and, the wrestlers to me were already superheroes. You didn't need to put them, stuff them into that superhero genre, and it just felt like wrestling was hot, and somebody spent a few bucks to license some books to try to make some money, and you could kind of feel that the people who were writing it weren't fans, and they didn't understand things, or they had that sort of derisive tone that you get when people are marketing to wrestling fans. Be like, oh, this is body slamming its way to your stores, and
right, they talk to fans like we're stupid in lowbrow terms, like here's something the uneducated wrestling fan will appreciate.
Right. I mean, when you see over the years that's been sort of a trend. I mean, that show The Mullets they put on on UPN after SmackDown was about idiot wrestling fans, and Ready to Rumble was about idiot wrestling fans. And I don't know. I think it's so derisive, and it makes me, it used to make me upset. So I decided to write a comic book that I think wrestling fans would appreciate. And I think that, highlighted sort of my love and passion for wrestling, and then hopefully wrestling fans would read it, but then hopefully eventually we could attract some people that might not be wrestling fans, and that they might be won over by it.
Right. You want it to cross over to the people who will appreciate the story being told, not just from a wrestling perspective, but because it's a good story.
Exactly.
Now, let me sidetrack a little bit, because I do want to talk more about Headlock, but we've talked about weird comic books that have tried to incorporate wrestling and not done it very well. I gotta ask, do you have that infamous Warrior comic book, the one where he's very uncomfortably opposing Santa Claus?
I don't own them anymore. I ended up selling a lot of them. I don't know, on some level it sort of offended me. I mean, it's funny because I had
It was offensive. You don't have to apologize for that.
It's years later, I had a relationship with the Ultimate Warrior. Like, we talked, and he was going to do a cover for my comic book before things kind of went south with him health-wise. He was a painter, and he painted with a palette knife, and he had done some really amazing stuff. So I had reached out to him, and he seemed kind of unsure about putting his art out there in such a high-profile thing like that. And it had, obviously knew he had been made fun of a lot for his comic book work in the past. So we were working past that, and I think at some point I would have gotten him to do it, but he obviously, he had passed on. But it's definitely a shame that we couldn't have gotten that together.
Well, and that seemed to be what he was all about right there at the end, was getting to reconnect with his audience and getting them to remember his vision and not all these other things that he'd become infamous for. So I'm sure that getting to re-enter the comic world in a much more positive light would have been very fitting for him, because he was trying to mend all those fences and build all those bridges right at the time he passed away.
Yeah, I mean, and he was a good dude. You could tell that. You could tell that whole DVD thing really hurt him a lot, just in talking with him. He wouldn't come right out and say it, but you could tell some of the things that he said. He would say to me, like, we're directly influenced by the things that he saw in there. So, it really was a real sensitive guy.
Oh, yeah. He made it clear in his Hall of Fame speech, too, when he kept making references like, I hope everybody self-destructs as successfully as I did. You knew that was still eating at him after all that time.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's hard, too, because, Vince McMahon is sort of known for messing with people. So, I think in some level you have to have super, super thick skin. But, I think on some level, too, everybody that gets into wrestling is, a performer at heart. And I don't think any performer enjoys negative feedback unless that's what they're going for, as a heel. But, so that's, it's a tough environment for a lot of those guys. They just, it's, I don't know. I couldn't imagine what they all have to sort of go through.
Yeah, well, the bigger the level it is that you're on, the more you have to walk on eggshells to, not get your feelings hurt, because it's a very rough environment. It's not just in the ring. There's the politics outside the ring too, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. So let's get back to Headlocked, because this is going to be the last territory of Volume 2. There's a Kickstarter going on. I know that you're going to have a lot of wrestlers that are involved in it. Besides, you've already mentioned, of course, Jerry Lawler doing illustration, Shane Helms having a story, but there's going to be more stories. John Morrison, who's now in Lucha Underground, as Johnny Mundo. AJ Styles, who's very successful in New Japan Pro Wrestling as their champion. You've got a lot of big names that are getting involved in this.
One of the cool things, I think, is that, when I started this book, it was just me and Artist Alley setting up, and I think, we, just trying to do my thing. And then I would find, like, the guys that were comic book fans. Like, Hurricane came over and bought a copy of my book from my table. And, Rob Van Dam came over and bought a copy of my comic book at a show, just walking around as a fan. And they reached out to me and they were like, oh, this is really great. Anything I can do to help. And, then I got hooked up with Jerry, and then people would find me, all the guys that like comic books and like art and whatever tend to find me now because they want to see us sort of get somewhere. The first words that Ken Anderson ever said to me were, can I do a cover for you, bro? So
he didn't say Mr. Anderson.
But it's been really cool that all these guys have been so supportive, because obviously they're all super famous and none of them need me, or none of them need what I'm doing, but they all like it and they're all trying to help, and that's very, very gratifying.
Well, let me make a little tangent here and bring it full circle, because earlier in the conversation you asked me how much I was into comic books and how much of a fan I was. And you mentioned yourself growing up, around the age of 8, you were into both wrestling and comics. I think that's a parallel for me as well, because I was reading Batman and Superman comics when I was a kid, and I was watching Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant on TV as a kid. Do you find that a lot of wrestlers have grown up comic book fans, that there's that much crossover with it, and wrestling fans in general?
I think there's a huge crossover. There's definitely a lot of, at New York Comic Con this weekend, there were wrestling shirts, up the wazoo. I just think that the one sort of unfortunate thing about comics and wrestling is that both are so sort of brand based, they're sort of dominated by that aesthetic, like WWE. People ask Shane at the show, oh, when are you going to wrestle again? He goes, I wrestle every week all over the world. There's
right.
more than one company.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, WWE is wrestling and that's it. And, for a lot of people, comic books are superheroes and that's it. So fighting against both of the sort of brand strength on both of those fronts is quite the battle. So I do think that there is a crossover. There's a huge crossover. I can tell you that. I mean, having seen it, but it's sort of at some point trying to get people to change their minds. I mean, if this was a WWE comic, we'd sell 10,000 more copies. If it was a Marvel comic or a DC comic, we'd sell probably 40,000 more copies. It's just sort of fighting that sort of double independent label.
Right, but at the same time, if it was a WWE comic, you'd have all sorts of editorial restrictions. You'd not be able to talk about wrestling. You'd have to say match. You wouldn't be able to talk about title belts. You'd have to say championships. All these different little lingo things that they do to the commentators, which Jerry Lawler knows all about.
Sure, and I think, but not even just that. WWE doesn't do anything that doesn't involve WWE characters, and that's part of my thing. I get a lot of wrestlers that ask me to put them in my books, and I don't, just because, the story's gotta be what the story's gotta be, and I don't want to have to worry about offending somebody. Be like, hey, in this situation, your guy's gotta act like a jerk, and I don't want to, somebody getting upset about that. I want to look strong here, whatever. So, it's just one of those things you just don't want to have to deal with, because you want the story ultimately the story is why we're all here.
Right. Well, it's the same kind of thing even when you're watching a show. Like, I'm a big fan of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and there were a couple of people in the first season of that show where I was like, I know they're probably going to make somebody a bad guy out of this group. I don't want them to do it. And then when they did, it was like, oh man, they took this actor I like so much and they ruined it. But the story arc's got to go where it's going to go, whether it's what a person you like or don't like. It's got to be what it's got to be.
And I think those are the things that are most successful. I mean, when you let the creators do their thing and you don't get too editorial involved. And that's always been one of my fears, is hooking up with somebody larger and then, having to sort of deal with people who don't understand wrestling. You know what I mean? Like, I'm one of the IWC, I guess, on some level, I go to indie shows all the time, and I feel like that's where the meat of the story comes from. I don't think the story would have been told the way that I'm telling it, if I had to do it a different way with somebody who wasn't necessarily as familiar with wrestling and familiar with the fan base and whatnot. So it definitely, it works on a creative level. It works pretty good the way it's going.
Well, since you mentioned going to indie shows, I have to ask you this question now, because my favorite independent promotion outside of Ring of Honor is Chikara, because they, to me, are quite successfully, they draw huge crowds for this and market themselves as it. They are bringing a comic book to life. They are characters that are ripped straight out of the pages. You've got colony of ants that are doing professional wrestling moves. I mean, it on some logical level, it's completely absurd, but when you go to their show and you lose yourself in it, it is so much fun.
No, I agree. I mean, there's a lot of people that are doing really awesome things on the indies, and that tends to be what I enjoy the most. I live in upstate New York, so my local indie is 2CW, and they have great stuff. They have great matches, and all of the guys that they bring in, when they bring in guys, are always put on a great show. They put on their working shoes. Even guys that don't necessarily have a rep for working hard in the indies, they work there because the crowd is great, and the promoter's pretty awesome. I like Hood Slam in Oakland. They're doing some really cool stuff. It's sort of I guess, I don't know, the easiest way to describe it would be a punk stoner Chikara.
Yeah, I've seen some of their stuff.
But that's a lot of fun, and I love Chikara. Beyond Wrestling is doing some really cool things. Interspecies Wrestling. There's a lot of people that are doing stuff that's way off the beaten path. I mean, I love Ring of Honor, and I love, I love the serious stuff too. I mean, I think there's a million different ways. Wrestling's a storytelling medium, and there's a million different ways that you can tell stories, but sometimes, for whatever reason, we've locked ourselves into this belief that we have to tell it this one way, which is the WWE way. And just like comics, I mean, there's a million types of stories you can tell with comics, not just superheroes. So I always try to support the guys that do things a little differently and come off the beaten path, because I think it's risky, but it's different, and I think just being different alone is a good thing sometimes.
We've sort of danced around this. We've talked about Headlocked, but we haven't talked about the story of Headlocked. And since it's now going to volume 2 with this Kickstarter campaign, let's draw the listeners in a little bit. Tell them a little bit about, don't give away everything, but just let them know where the story's gone so far.
Well, Headlocked is about a kid who's a theater major in college that sort of unexpectedly falls in love with wrestling, and it just becomes an obsession for him, and he decides that he wants to become a wrestler, and he quits school, and it's sort of his journey through the business starting on like day one. So we take this sort of, fresh-faced, middle-class college kid, and we sort of drop him in the Wild West. He's learning the craft of wrestling, and we're sort of examining the craft of wrestling through the eyes of a performance artist, but at the same time, he's sort of navigating like the underbelly of the business, trying to get to the bright lights and the big stage. So, on some level, it's kind of the girl gets off the bus in Hollywood. But, on the other hand, like I said, we're sort of examining wrestling, through the eyes of a performance artist, which is why we use like 90% of the art is done by actual wrestlers, which I think is a neat little hook.
Yeah, and they've all been through that journey themselves. They've gone to the bad training school with the guy who doesn't know a wrist lock from a wristwatch, and they've done the indie show where they've gotten paid off with $5 and a hot dog from the concession stand. They can bring that authenticity to it of this is what it's like when you're starting out.
And not for nothing, but I think those experiences aren't necessarily just specific to wrestling. I think anybody that's starting out goes through that. I think bands. Anytime you're doing something creative, as a comic book creator, it's not obviously as rock and roll as say wrestling or, rock and roll, but I get out of work. I have a regular job. I get out of work at night. I work nights. I get out of work Friday morning and I drive to a show and I don't sleep. And then I do the show all day Friday, all day Saturday, all day Sunday. And I drive back on Sunday and I go to work on Sunday night. I've had to, pull over and sleep in my car. I've crashed on people's couches. Anything you can do to keep your expenses down and to get your art in front of as many people as possible. I can definitely relate to that on some level, and I think anybody can that's ever tried to do anything on their own. You go through struggles, you go through doubts and, emotional roller coasters and whatnot. So, I've been through all of that, and I think I can bring that perspective to the story too.
Yeah, you're right. Anybody that does that, whether they get into acting or music or wrestling or, like you said, any creative endeavor, you're going to struggle a lot. Most people are not an overnight viral sensation. They put in a lot of years and a lot of hard work to get to the top.
Sure. We've been grinding now on this for 6 years, and it's tough. It's tough getting the media attention. It's tough to, it's tough to get on shelves in stores. All of that's a battle. So that's where the Kickstarter comes in, and that's why it's so important for us, because that allows us to essentially get enough pre-orders to fund the production of the book. And, comic books are art, and art is not cheap. We have we do like 150, 160 page book. And all those guys, I don't make a dime off of it, but, all these guys, that's how they feed their families. So, the artists, the printers, the people that are involved, and I want to make sure all those people get paid. So, the Kickstarter goes out worldwide and people can contribute, and, instead of having to worry about trying to 3 months before the book comes out, going into previews and trying to pre-order it from your comic book store. Cause I went that route with my first couple books, and it was a nightmare. I had people emailing me, telling me, oh, my store won't order it and I can't get it and whatnot. So, Kickstarter is a great thing for us, and that's, we can use that as a distribution mechanism that wouldn't otherwise be open to us.
Well, you've just opened me up for 3 questions about Kickstarter, so hopefully we have time to get through them all. But
sure.
The first one I'm going to ask is, I've heard varying things about Kickstarter. I've donated a few Kickstarters myself, and I don't quite understand how much of a Kickstarter campaign actually ends up going towards the project at the end, because I know that there's like credit card fees and Kickstarter takes a portion. How much do you actually get when you set a goal?
Between Kickstarter and Amazon, they take 8%, somewhere between 8 and 10%. So it's not too bad. You just factor that into your budget, and, you roll from there.
Right. So like if you need 15,000, you set it at 16.5, knowing that they'll take 10.
Correct.
That explains that point. And
honestly, it's more than worth it. Kickstarter has its issues, don't get me wrong, but if it wasn't for Kickstarter, our last book wouldn't have come out. And I think it's a gorgeous book, and it's got, art and stories from a lot of wrestlers. Kickstarter made that happen. There's been, everybody knows the potato salad story and people have heard 100 horror stories, but I mean, I think on some level there's been a lot more success stories.
Well, that's what I was going to say was my point number 2, is it's obviously been a success for a lot of people, and it's been helpful for you in this case. So tell everybody about the benefits, because I know part of the reason I donate to Kickstarter campaigns is you get nice little rewards when you give enough to help the project get going.
Well, for us, yeah, I mean, like I said, we look at it like a pre-order thing. Like if you want to read the book, you can just, you can plunk down your money and you can get a physical copy. You can get a digital copy. You can get the higher up you go, you can get volume 1 and volume 2. You can get a commissioned sketch from our artists, Mikel Molapola, who's a wrestler from New Zealand, who's amazing. You can get drawn into the book in a crowd scene, in a shot. You can get a speaking role in the book. You can be drawn in as a wrestler. All of those tiers are taken. They go really, really quick.
That was going to be my third question, actually, was what does a speaking role mean? And obviously, somebody already snapped that up for $250, but what is a speaking role? Does that mean the character walks on the screen and has dialogue in the comic, or? Yeah,
we use your facial likeness on a character, and we try to give you a prominent shot We give you a prominent shot and, like a page or, sometimes a page or two. Sometimes, sometimes it's, a little kid asking for an autograph, but we give them a nice big shot. We try to make sure people get their money's worth. And then we give them a print of the page that they're featured on, with a little credit at the bottom, so and so as, so that's a nice little Easter egg, I think. The guys that pledge to become wrestlers, they get a sketch of themselves as a wrestler in addition to, being featured in the book, and having, potentially having, somebody like Jill Thompson doing their, like in our last book, the guys that are the tag team champions was our top donor. And so they were featured on the credits page. I mean, in addition to being featured throughout the story, but they were featured on the credits page, painted by Jill Thompson, which I think is really cool. The guy that was featured heavily in the 3rd issue was also a pledge to be a wrestler. And I didn't it gives me it's a little fun for me because I look at these guys and I look at their faces and I try to come up with a character for them. And then sometimes that totally changes the way I was going to do the story. Like the entire 3rd issue of our last book was completely rearranged just based on the fact that this guy sent me a picture and it gave me an idea and it sent the whole thing in a totally different direction.
Awesome. So people are not just getting to be in the books, they're also getting to influence the direction of the books. When they donate with Kickstarter, they're becoming a part of the story.
And that's what it is. I mean, for us, this is a passion project, and we want everybody to be a part of it. We want everybody to feel like they're a part of building something. I mean, it's in comics, it's almost impossible to break in without, a name creator and not being from a top 10 publisher, I mean, it's a real slog, and we've built our readership one person at a time, going to shows. I mean, I've hand sold almost every book I've ever done, which isn't necessarily a great business model. Obviously, it's not necessarily a profitable business model, and it's not necessarily something, I would much rather be able to take the time to create than have to hustle for sales constantly. So my goal is that hopefully we can get a base of people that will pledge to the Kickstarter. Once a year we can put out a new book, and, people will pledge like $20 to $25 to get a copy of the book, and we'll mail it to you. And if we can get enough of those people to where it's not such a slog where I'm not doing 14 interviews a day, then we can keep this book moving, and we can bring people more content and have more cool wrestling stories and more opportunities for people to be drawn into the book. It's just hard when you have to stop for 60 days to bang the drum.
And of course, I want everybody to know where you're going to be next, when you're promoting the book outside of these interviews, what shows you're going to be at, and tell everybody how they can find the campaign on Kickstarter.
Next weekend, actually this weekend on Sunday, I'm in Syracuse at the Landmark Theater for the Syracuse Heroes Expo. The following weekend, I'm in Vermont at the Vermont Comic Con in Burlington. And as far as I know, that's all I've got booked at the moment. I'm going to some indie shows, probably going to some 2CW shows in the November and December, but I don't have anything else on the books. If you want to get at us, obviously the Kickstarter is Kickstarter.com. Headlocked: The Last Territory Volume 2. If you're late to the party, you can pledge for Volume 1, you can pledge for Volume 2, or you can pledge for both of them. We try to make it accessible for everybody, and we try to, variety of levels so people can pledge at whatever they're comfortable with. And then all of our social media is Headlocked Comic. It's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I eat a lot of food when I travel, so you'll see a lot of. I just met somebody who follows me on Instagram for my food pictures, and not because of my comic books. So that might get changed to fatass.com. I don't know. So I mean, I'm behind all of those things. Like if you send something to any of those things, you're going to get me on the other end of it. So if you have questions, comments, concerns, whatever, I'm always down to talk Headlocked and explain it and, hopefully get people involved.
Yep. At Headlocked Comic, Facebook.com/Headlocked Comic, Headlocked Comic on Instagram as well. And, I gotta tell you, looking at these Kickstarter benefits, the one that's really tempting me now is that, you can get a signed copy. Jerry the King Lawler will sign it for $35. That is you pay $25 for a good quality book and you pay $25 to $50 for an autograph at a lot of shows. So $35 for both is a hell of a deal.
And we also, one of the sort of hidden deals that I don't think people realize, we have a poster for $150. It's signed by Jerry, Rob Van Dam, Ken Anderson, Chris Daniels, Hurricane, Sam Shaw, Sin Bodie, Judah Friedlander, Jill Thompson, Mikkel, my artist, Scott Lost, who did a piece in the book. You would probably pay a ton more for all those autographs any which way. Plus you get a copy of the book with it signed by the King.
Yeah, that is an incredible deal for $150. Where are you going to even meet Judah Friedlander? You're not going to run into him at most shows anyway. So, that's one of many autographs that are on that.
Sure, and yeah, Judah's a big fan of the book. He wrote the introduction to our last book. We're in the process of lining up somebody for the introduction for this book. But I don't have anything to announce yet on that front.
Well, they'll just have to pledge to the Kickstarter campaign so they can get all the updates and be informed what's coming up and who you got for it. So everybody go to Headlocked and pledge your donation now and get a copy or get whatever reward you want.
Every dollar helps, man. Every dollar helps us build this thing and help us keep the train going a little bit longer.
Absolutely. I hope it works out like you said, that once a year around this time, everybody can just pledge and keep the train going.
And that's all it is. Like I said, this is a passion project, and I don't ever expect to make a dime off of this. Every dollar I make, I put back into the book. I put back into going to shows, getting different artists. We got some really big names in the comic book industry that are big wrestling fans that are contributing to this one. Jill Thompson and Ben Temple-Smith and Ramon Villalobos and Jamal Igle. So, everything gets invested back into the book. We make it that much cooler. I just want to tell this story as long as I possibly can because there's so much to explore in the wrestling industry, as an art form, as a subculture. I could literally tell this story forever. So I think, I just want people to help us do that. And I think you'll be, pleasantly rewarded on the story side of it.
Well, you can count me in as a supporter because I've always believed the best comic book stories can go on forever and ever too. It's not like they haven't relaunched Spider-Man 10 times. It just keeps going on and on. So if you get in now, you'll just carry on with the story for as long as you go on. And
one of the things too that I think is cool is this is a real character driven story. There's not a lot of stories where you can say the character changes over time. Batman is Batman, Spider-Man is Spider-Man, and they've been those characters pretty much the entire run. Breaking Bad I think was really cool because you saw Walter White evolve. Mike Hartman is evolving. Who he is when he starts is not going to be who he is when he finishes. And I think that journey is the heart of the story, and I think is, one of the real cool reasons to check it out.
Just before we go, I want to mention, because you brought up Breaking Bad, I binged through that show on Netflix, and when I got to season 5, I really had to slow down and stop. Not only because I didn't want the story to come to an end, and I knew it would soon, but because I really found myself hating Walter White. And I started out at the beginning cheering for him, but by season 5, you're like, God, this guy is such a dick. He's become a good, he does the complete pro wrestling turn from babyface, poor guy has cancer, his wife is haranguing him. And then by season 5, you're like, this guy is just pure evil.
But I think the fun part about that is that you can also see where that all came from, sort of, how he got, sort of screwed out of his stuff at the beginning and then having cancer and just never sort of getting what he felt like, was his worth. And I think that happens with a lot of people in society, and you can see where that sort of bubbles up. And then even after, it was never about the money. It was all about the reckoning with him. And I think that, and it took too long for him to realize that before he lost everything. So I do think that that's, it's an interesting thing, because you can see it's not like, evil for the sake of being evil. It's, you can see the genesis of where the seed is planted and how that grows, with all the sort of experiences that he has. And I think that's some excellent storytelling.
It is. It definitely is excellent storytelling. If they had made a graphic novel version of Breaking Bad, I would have been just as wrapped up in it as I am watching it on TV.
Sure, no, and I think that there's a lot of things you can do with the comic book, and that's why I tell the story in a comic book form. I think there's a lot you can do with it, in the medium specifically, that you can't do on TV, and that you can't do, TV has its, obviously has its things too, every medium has different things, different advantages. I'd probably like to do a Headlocked animated series at some point. I wouldn't like to do a live action one, because I don't think I'd want anybody to have to take 100 bumps to,
right.
to tell my story, but I think it would be cool. And we did a motion comic, it's up on YouTube now. It's a 5-minute piece that, Ken Anderson and Kevin Gill, did the voices for. And I think that, that's a really cool, very cool thing.
Well, that's going to be my final plug then as we wrap it up, is if you're looking for more about the Kickstarter, you want to know what it is and get a visual idea of it and hear Mr. Anderson, you can go watch that video on YouTube, and then you'll know why you want to support the Kickstarter.
And if you do want to see some more stuff, Visionary Comics, which is my studio, they're hosting Headlocked webcomics every Monday for the duration of the campaign. We just put one up yesterday, and we put one up last week, so there's a couple of them up there for you to check out. So it's free content. You can't go wrong. So we got some cool stories, and you can get a kind of a feel for what we're trying to do.
We don't want it to just be free. Donate to the campaign and keep this thing rolling. So, Mike, thanks for taking the time today. I'll let you get back to your busy schedule, but we appreciate the interview.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Everybody check out the Headlocked comic on Kickstarter and support the campaign. Thanks, and have a good night.